3,000 years ago, the Galactic Council made a decision that would change everything. They had discovered a small blue planet spinning quietly in the outer arm of the galaxy. The planet was called Earth by the creatures who lived on it, and those creatures called themselves humans. High Arbiter. Vexillon stood before the assembled representatives of 400 different species in the Grand Chamber of Unity. He was a being made of living crystal, and light danced inside his body like trapped stars. He had lived for nearly 1,000 years and had seen many civilizations rise and fall. But he had never seen anything quite like humans. We had been watching this species for 50% of their years, Vexillon announced to the chamber. His voice echoed through the vast space, translated instantly into hundreds of languages. In that short time, they have gone from riding animals to building machines that fly. They have split the atom and created weapons that can destroy entire cities in seconds. The representatives murmured among themselves. The Kalari, a species of four-armed beings with skin like blue leather, whispered nervously. The Vanthori, tall, bird-like creatures with golden feathers, ruffled their wings in agitation. Even the Morvax, who were made of living gas and feared almost nothing, seemed troubled. But that is not the worst part, Vexillon continued. They do not use these weapons against other species. They use them against each other. They fight wars among themselves with a brutality we have never documented in any other civilization. They kill their own kind by the millions. A holographic display appeared in the center of the chamber, showing images of human conflicts. Cities burned. Armies clashed. Bombs fell from the sky like rain. The representatives watched in horror as the small creatures on the blue planet tore each other apart with mechanical efficiency. "What do you propose?" asked Ambassador Kira L. of the Vanthori Collective. She was younger than most of the council members. It's only 300 years old, and she had a reputation for asking difficult questions. "We cannot simply destroy them. That would make us no better than they are." Vexillon nodded slowly, light pulsing inside his crystalline form. "I propose isolation. We will erect a barrier around their solar system, a field of warped space-time that nothing can penetrate. They will be contained, unable to spread their violence to the rest of the galaxy. And we will wait." "Wait for what?" Kirill asked. "For them to destroy themselves," Vexillon replied. "Our scientists have run the calculations. Based on their current trajectory, humans will cause their own extinction within the next 500 years. We simply need to ensure they cannot harm anyone else before that happens." The vote was held, and it was unanimous. Every species agreed that humans were too dangerous to be allowed into the galactic community. The barrier was erected. Automated monitoring stations were placed around its perimeter. The council moved on to other matters. Centuries passed. Empires rose and fell among the stars. New species were discovered and welcomed into the council. Trade routes expanded across thousands of light years. And slowly, gradually, everyone forgot about the small blue planet and its dangerous inhabitants. Ambassador. Kirel never forgot. She had voted for isolation like everyone else. But something about the humans had stayed with her. In her quarters aboard the diplomatic station orbiting Nexus Prime, she kept a private archive of everything the Council had ever recorded about Earth. She watched the footage of human wars, their terrible weapons, their capacity for destruction. But she also watched other things that the Council had dismissed as irrelevant. She watched humans, rebuilding cities after disasters, working together to save strangers from floods and earthquakes. She watched them caring for their sick and elderly, creating art and music that expressed emotions even she could feel through the cold lens of the recording devices. She watched them reaching toward the stars with primitive rockets, their faces full of hope and wonder. "You are more complicated than they give you credit for," Kiriel whispered to the images of humans on her screen. "I wonder if we made a mistake." But there was nothing she could do. The barrier was in place, the decision had been made, and the Council had moved on. Humans were a closed chapter in galactic history, a dangerous species safely contained until they inevitably destroyed themselves. Except, they did not destroy themselves. On the edge of Council space, monitoring station Theta 7 floated silently in the void. It was an ancient piece of technology, 3,000 years old. running on programming that had not been updated since the day the barrier was erected. Its sensors were pointed inward toward the isolation zone, watching for any sign that the humans had finally ended their own existence. For 3,000 years, the station had detected nothing unusual. The humans had fought more wars, yes? They had come close to destruction several times, but somehow, impossibly, they had always pulled back from the brink. And in the last few centuries, something strange had begun to happen. The wars had stopped. The station's simple. Artificial intelligence could not understand what this meant. It simply recorded the data and continued watching. It recorded as humans cleaned their polluted atmosphere and healed their dying oceans. It recorded as their nations merged into a single unified government. It recorded as they built great ships and sent them to the other planets in their solar system. And then, one ordinary day that would later be remembered as the most important moment in galactic history, the station detected something impossible. Energy readings from within the isolation zone began to spike beyond anything the ancient sensors could process. A massive buildup of exotic matter, the kind that could only be produced by an advanced, faster-than-light drive, was forming near the barrier's edge. The humans were not just surviving. They were trying to escape. The station's programming was simple and clear. It had one job to do when something like this happened. And it did that job with mechanical precision. It sent an alert to the Galactic Council. In the Grand Chamber of Unity, an alarm began to sound for the first time in over 1,000 years. Representatives looked up from their discussions, confused and alarmed. Technicians rushed to their stations, trying to understand what was happening. High Arbiter Vexilin, still alive after all these millennia, felt a chill run through his crystalline form as he read the alert. The isolation zone. Humanity. After 3,000 years, the forgotten prisoners were knocking on their cage. "This is impossible," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "They should not have this technology. They should not even exist anymore." But the readings were clear. The humans were coming, and there was nothing the Council could do to stop them. Across the galaxy, Ambassador Kirel received the same alert. She read it carefully, then looked at the images of humans still displayed on her private screen. A small smile crossed her feathered face. "Well," she said softly to herself, "it seems you had more surprises left in you than anyone expected. I wonder what you have become." She did not know yet that she would soon find out. None of them knew that the galaxy was about to change forever. Admiral Derek Lawson stood on the bridge of the starship, Dever, and looked at the wall that had imprisoned his species for 3,000 years. It did not look like much. Just a faint shimmer in space, like heat rising from hot pavement on a summer day. But that shimmer had kept humanity trapped in their own solar system since before the pyramids of Egypt had crumbled to dust. "How are we looking?" Derek asked, turning to look at his crew. They were the best humanity had to offer, handpicked for this mission from billions of volunteers. Dr. Patricia Grant looked up from her console, pushing a strand of gray hair from her face. She was 62 years old, the greatest physicist of her generation. And she had spent her entire life working toward this moment. "The drive is operating at full capacity. We are generating enough exotic matter to punch a hole through the barrier. But we will only have a window of about 4 minutes before it closes again." Commander Lisa Monroe checked her tactical displays. She was younger than Patricia, only in her 30s. But she had the calm confidence of someone who had faced danger many times. "All weapons are powered down as ordered. Shields are at minimum. We are going through looking as non-threatening as possible." Derek nodded. They had debated this decision for months before launch. Some had argued that they should go through ready for battle, prepared for whatever hostile aliens might be waiting on the other side. But Derek had disagreed. Humanity had spent 3,000 years learning to be better than their ancestors. They would not throw that away by starting their first contact with the galaxy as aggressors. "Communications?" Derek asked. Carlos Vega, a young man with dark eyes and quick hands, looked up from his station. "Ready to broadcast on all frequencies the moment we cross the barrier. Our message of peace is loaded and ready to transmit in every format we could imagine." Derek took a deep breath. Behind him, through the viewports, He could see Earth hanging in the distance. Blue and green and white, the only home humanity had ever known. Billions of people were watching, waiting, hoping. The weight of their expectations pressed down on him like a physical force. "All hands," Derek said into the ship-wide com. "This is the Admiral. In a few minutes, we will become the first humans to leave our solar system. I will not lie to you. We do not know what is waiting for us out there. We do not know why we were imprisoned or what put us here. But whatever we find, remember who we are. Remember what we survived to get here? We are humanity and we do not give up." He closed the channel and turned back to face the shimmer that separated them from the rest of the universe. "Take us through." The Endeavor surged forward, its engines howling with power that would have seemed like magic to Derek's ancestors. The barrier grew larger in the viewports, that faint shimmer becoming a wall of distorted light that stretched in every direction. Ancient technology, built by beings who had decided that humanity was too dangerous to be allowed freedom, pushed back against them. For one terrible moment, Derek thought they would fail. The ship shook violently, alarms screaming throughout the bridge. Consoles sparked and flickered. The barrier was stronger than they had expected, fighting against their intrusion with everything it had. "Hull stress at critical levels," Lisa reported, her voice tight but controlled. "If we do not break through in the next 30 seconds, we will have to abort." "Increase power to the drive," Patricia ordered. "Everything we have left." "I'll burn out the engine," Carlos said. "If we do not get through, the engine will not matter anyway." Derek gripped the arms of his command chair as the Endeavor screamed against the barrier. 3,000 years of imprisonment? 3,000 years of wondering why they had been caged. 3,000 years of humanity clawing its way up from the brink of self-destruction to reach this moment. And then, with a flash of light so bright that sensors across the galaxy detected it, the Endeavor tore through the barrier and emerged into open space. The silence that followed was deafening. Every alarm stopped. Every console stabilized. The viewports showed stars that no human had ever seen before, clear and bright and impossibly beautiful. "We did it," Patricia whispered, tears running down her face. "We actually did it." Derek allowed himself a small smile. But he knew their journey was just beginning. "Carlos, begin transmitting our message of peace." "Lisa, what are we looking at out here?" Lisa studied her sensors, and her expression quickly changed from relief to concern. "Admiral, I am detecting multiple vessels converging on our position. They are coming from multiple directions, and they are coming fast. Very fast." "How many?" "At least 30. And based on their energy signatures, each one of them significantly outguns us." The view screen flickered as the alien vessels dropped out of their faster-than-light travel and surrounded the Endeavor. They were unlike anything humans had ever imagined. Elegant and deadly, shaped like teardrops and crystals in impossible geometric forms. Their hulls gleamed with materials that human science could not identify. "They are hailing us," Carlos reported. "Should I respond?" Derek stood from his chair and straightened his uniform. "Put them through. Let us see who our jailers are." The view screen changed to show a being made of living crystal. Light danced inside its translucent body, and when it spoke, its voice carried the weight of ancient authority. "Unidentified vessel, you have violated Galactic Council interdiction protocols. You will power down your engines and prepare to be boarded. Any resistance will be met with immediate destruction." Derek looked at the alien, this creature who had the power to end humanity's journey before it truly began. He thought about how easy it would be to fight, to rage against the injustice of their imprisonment. His ancestors would have done exactly that, but Derek was not his ancestors. "My name is Admiral Derek Lawson of Earth," he replied, keeping his voice calm and respectful. "We mean no harm to anyone. We have spent 3,000 years imprisoned in our own solar system, and we have come seeking answers. Why were we isolated? What did we do to deserve imprisonment?" There was a long pause. Across the galaxy, beings who had forgotten humanity existed watched the exchange with growing amazement. The humans were supposed to be primitive and violent. They were supposed to have destroyed themselves long ago. Yet here they were, calm and dignified, asking reasonable questions instead of attacking blindly. "Ambassador Kiroel, watching from the diplomatic station, felt her feathers rise with emotion. She had waited 3,000 years for this moment, and it was nothing like anyone had expected. The crystalline being on the view screen studied Derek for a long moment before responding. "I am High Arbiter Vexolin of the Galactic Council, and I believe, Admiral Lawson, that we have much to discuss." The galaxy would never be the same again. The Endeavor was escorted to the Caloran system by a fleet of Council warships. Admiral Derek Lawson watched through the viewports as they passed wonders that no human had ever seen before. Space stations the size of small moons floated in the void. Ships of 100 different designs moved along invisible highways of commerce and diplomacy. Planets glowed with the lights of civilizations that had existed since before humans had learned to walk upright. "It is beautiful," Patricia whispered, standing beside Derek on the bridge. "All of this was out here, and we never knew." "We were not meant to know," Derek replied quietly. "They decided we were too dangerous to be part of it." The fleet brought them to Nexus Prime, the capital world of the Galactic Council. It was a massive artificial planet, constructed over millions of years by 100 different species working together. Its surface was covered with towers of crystal and metal that reached toward the stars. Ships came and went constantly, carrying diplomats and traders from every corner of the galaxy. The Endeavor was directed to a docking platform high above the planet's surface. A delegation was waiting for them when the airlock opened. High Arbiter Vexilon stood at the front, his crystalline body glowing with complex patterns of light. Behind him were beings of every shape and size imaginable. Some had too many eyes, others had no eyes at all. Some floated on currents of magnetic energy, others walked on dozens of legs. Derek led his crew onto the platform, acutely aware of how small and fragile they must look to these ancient beings. He had fought in the last great war on Earth, the conflict that had finally convinced humanity to put aside their differences and work together. He had faced death many times and never felt fear. But standing before the assembled might of galactic civilization, he felt like a child walking into a room full of giants. Admiral Lawson Vexolin said, his voice carrying the weight of 3,000 years of judgment. "You and your crew will accompany us to the Grand Chamber of Unity. There, you will answer for your species' crimes." "Crimes?" Derek asked, keeping his voice steady. "What crimes have we committed? We have only just arrived." "Your species was isolated for a reason," Vexolin replied. "Your history of violence, your capacity for destruction, your tendency towards self-annihilation. These are well documented. The Council will decide whether you represent a continuing threat to galactic peace." Derek wanted to argue, to defend his species against accusations based on events that had happened centuries ago, but he held his tongue. There would be time for arguments later. For now, he needed to understand what they were dealing with. The humans were led through corridors of polished metal and living crystal, past windows that looked out on gardens filled with plants from 1,000 different worlds. Other beings stopped and stared as they passed. Some looked curious, others afraid, still others openly hostile. Word of humanity's arrival had spread quickly. Not everyone was pleased. They finally arrived at the Grand Chamber of Unity, and Derek's breath caught in his throat. It was the largest enclosed space he had ever seen, a dome so vast that clouds formed near its ceiling. Seats rose in tiers around a central platform, and every seat was filled with representatives of different species. Hundreds of them, thousands perhaps, all gathered to judge humanity. "You will stand on the central platform," Vexolin instructed. "You will answer any questions the Council puts to you honestly and completely. Deception will be detected and punished." Derek nodded and led his crew to the platform. They stood in a circle, back to back, facing the assembled representatives of galactic civilization. It felt like standing in the center of a hurricane. With forces beyond their control, swirling all around them, Vexolin took his place at the highest point of the chamber and raised his crystalline arms for silence. The murmuring crowd fell quiet. "Out. The Council will come to order," he announced. "We are here to discuss the emergence of humanity from the isolation zone and to determine what threat, if any, they pose to galactic peace. Representatives may speak in turn." First to speak was a being that looked like a cloud of dark smoke with eyes like burning coals. Its voice crackled like static electricity. The humans should be destroyed immediately. Their history proves they cannot be trusted. They will bring war and destruction wherever they go. Derek felt Lisa tense beside him, her hand moving instinctively toward where her weapon would have been, if they had been allowed to keep them. He put a hand on her arm, silently telling her to wait. Another being spoke. This one a massive insectoid creature with mandibles that clicked as it formed words. Destruction seems excessive. Perhaps they should simply be returned to their isolation. The barrier can be reinforced to prevent future escapes. More representatives spoke, some calling for humanity's destruction, others for their continued imprisonment. Very few spoke in their favor. Derek listened to each one, his heart growing heavier with every word. These beings had decided humanity's fate 3,000 years ago, and it seemed they were not interested in changing their minds. Then a new voice cut through the debate, clear and musical and surprisingly firm. "May I speak?" All eyes turned to Ambassador Kirahel, who was rising from her seat among the Vanthori delegation. Her golden feathers caught the light as she moved, and her large eyes were fixed on the humans standing on the central platform. "The ambassador from the Vanthori collective is recognized," Vexilon said, a note of surprise in his voice. Kira walked slowly down the tiers of seats until she stood at the edge of the central platform. Only a few feet from Derek, she studied him for a long moment, and he had the strange feeling that she was looking not just at him, but through him, seeing something that others could not. "I have studied humanity for longer than any other being in this chamber," Kira said, her voice carrying to every corner of the vast space. "I have watched their wars and their atrocities. I have seen the worst they are capable of. But I have also seen something that seems to have escaped everyone else's notice." She turned to face the assembled representatives, spreading her wings slightly for emphasis. 3,000 years of isolation. With no help from us, no guidance, no reason to believe anyone was watching. Humanity did not destroy itself. They came close many times. They developed weapons that could have ended their species in hours, and yet they chose not to use them. They chose to survive. They chose to change. Murmurs spread through the chamber. This was not what anyone had expected. "I've reviewed the data from the monitoring stations," Kiriel continued. "In the last 5 centuries, human wars have declined by 97%. Their pollution has been reversed. Their population has stabilized. They have unified their planet under a single government and turned their eyes toward the stars, not as conquerors, but as explorers." She turned back to Derek, her large eyes meeting his. "Admiral Lawson, is what I have said accurate?" Derek nodded slowly.
Yes.
"It is. We nearly destroyed ourselves many times. But we learned from our mistakes. We are not the same species that was locked away 3,000 years ago." Kiriel smiled, a strange expression on her avian face. "Then, I believe the Council owes humanity something they have never received from us. A chance." The chamber erupted in chaos. The debate raged for hours. Representatives argued and shouted and threatened. Some demanded that humanity be destroyed immediately. Others supported Kiriel's call for a chance. Still others wanted to simply reinforce the barrier and pretend none of this had ever happened. Through it all, Derek and his crew stood on the central platform, watching the fate of their species being decided by beings who had never met a human before today. It was exhausting, terrifying, and deeply frustrating. But Derek kept his composure, knowing that any sign of the anger or aggression that humans were famous for would only prove their enemies right. When the session finally ended, the humans were escorted to quarters aboard a diplomatic station orbiting Nexus Prime. The rooms were comfortable enough, clearly designed for beings who breathed oxygen and preferred standard gravity. But there were guards at every door and monitoring devices in every corner. They were guests in name only. "What do you think our chances are?" Lisa asked, pacing back and forth across the small common room they had been given. Derek sat heavily on a strange piece of furniture that was probably meant to be a chair. "I honestly do not know. Some of them seem open to hearing us out, but most of them made up their minds 3,000 years ago." Trisha was examining the walls, running her fingers over the smooth material. Their technology is incredible. Some of this is beyond anything we ever imagined. If they decide to destroy us, we would have no way to stop them, and we need to convince them not to, Derek said. We need to show them who we really are, not who their ancestors thought we were. The door chimed, and a moment later Ambassador Kiral entered. She had removed some of the formal decoration she had worn in the council chamber, and she looked tired, but determined. I hope I am not intruding, she said, her musical voice softer than it had been during the debate. Derek stood and offered her the seat he had been using. Not at all. We owe you our thanks for speaking on our behalf. Kira settled onto the strange chair with more grace than Derek had managed. I only spoke the truth. I have been watching your species for a very long time, Admiral. You are not the monsters everyone believes you to be. Why did you watch us? Patricia asked, curiosity overcoming her caution. If everyone else forgot about us, why did you keep looking? The Vanthori ambassador was quiet for a moment, her large eyes distant with memory. When the council voted to isolate your world, I was young. I had only recently taken my position as ambassador. I voted with everyone else because it seemed like the right thing to do. But afterward, I could not stop thinking about you. She looked at each of the humans in turn. Your species is so strange. You have such capacity for violence, such talent for destruction, but you also have something I have never seen in any other species. You have the ability to change, to look at yourselves honestly, and decide to be different. It was not easy, Derek admitted. We came very close to ending ourselves many times. There were moments when I thought we would not make it. You did make it, Kiral said, and that is what matters. The Council does not understand this because they have never seen it before. Most species are static. They are what they are, and they remain that way for millions of years. But you humans, you evolve. Not just physically, but socially, culturally, psychologically. You are a species in constant motion. The door chimed again, and this time a young Kalari entered, his 4 arms carrying a communication device. Ambassador, you are needed. The Council has received a new transmission from the human homeworld. Kiral's feathers ruffled with concern. What kind of transmission? A ship. Another ship is coming through the barrier. A larger one. Derek felt his heart skip. He knew what this must be. When the Endeavor had left Earth, the plan had always been for more ships to follow if the first contact went well. But they had only been here for a day. There had been no time to send a message back. My crew and I should be there for this, Derek said quickly. Please, Kiral hesitated, then nodded. Come with me. But be warned, Admiral. Some members of the Council will see this as proof that humanity cannot be trusted. Another ship coming through the barrier will look like an invasion force. They hurried through the corridors of the diplomatic station to a command center filled with displays and monitoring equipment. Council representatives were already gathered, watching as sensor data streamed in from the edge of the former isolation zone. The vessel is massive, a Kellari technician reported. At least 10 times the size of the first ship. It is armed with weapons we cannot identify and is broadcasting on all frequencies. High Arbiter Vexolin turned his crystalline gaze toward Derek. You promised you came in peace, Admiral. Yet now, we see the truth. Your first ship was only a scout, sent to test our defenses before your real fleet arrived. That is not what this is, Derek said. But even as he spoke, he was not entirely sure. What ship could have followed them so quickly? The main display flickered and resolved into an image. A human woman appeared on the screen, middle-aged with dark hair, streaked with gray and eyes that carried the weight of responsibility. She wore a formal uniform that Derek recognized immediately, and his confusion turned to shock. My name is President Maria Santos of the United Earth Government, the woman said, her voice calm and steady. I come in response to the activation of our emergency protocols. When the Endeavor passed through the barrier, an automated signal was sent back to Earth confirming their success. This C now also indicated that they had encountered other intelligent life. Maria paused, seeming to look directly at the beings watching her transmission. I understand that our presence may cause alarm. I understand that you isolated our species because you feared what we might do to the galaxy. But I have come personally to speak on behalf of all humanity. Not to threaten, not to demand, but to ask. Give us a chance to prove ourselves. Let us show you who we have become. The command center fell silent. Derek stared at the image of his president, a woman he had never met in person, but whose leadership had guided humanity through its most important moment. She had come herself, risking her life, to speak for their species. She is either very brave or very foolish, Vexilon said quietly. She is both, Derek replied. That is what it means to be human. Kirel stepped forward. Hi, Arbiter. I request that President Santos be allowed to address the Council directly. Let her speak for her species, as I have spoken for mine. Vexolin was silent for a long moment, light pulsing slowly within his crystalline form. Finally he nodded. Very well. Bring the human president to the Grand Chamber of Unity. Let us hear what she has to say. As they watched Maria's ship descend toward Nexus Prime, escorted by the same fleet that had surrounded the Endeavor, Derek felt something he had almost forgotten how to feel. Hope. Fragile and uncertain, but there nonetheless. Whatever happened next, humanity would face it together. President Maria Santos walked into the Grand Chamber of Unity. With the confidence of someone who had spent her entire life preparing for impossible moments, she was not tall, not physically imposing, not blessed with the natural presence that some leaders seem to have. But when she spoke, people listened. And today, she needed an entire galaxy to listen. The chamber was even more crowded than it had been the day before. Word of humanity's emergence had spread across the stars, and representatives from species who had not attended a council session in centuries had come to witness history being made. The tiers of seats rose so high that the uppermost ones were lost in the artificial clouds near the ceiling. Maria walked to the central platform where Derek and his crew were waiting. She nodded to the Admiral, a silent acknowledgement of everything he had done to bring them to this moment. Then she turned to face the assembled representatives of galactic civilization. I stand before you as the leader of a species you decided was too dangerous to be free, Maria began, her voice carrying clearly through the vast space. 3,000 years ago, you looked at humanity and saw violence, destruction, and chaos. You were not wrong. Murmurs rippled through the chamber. This was not the defense anyone had expected. When you found us, we were tearing ourselves apart. We had weapons that could end all life on our planet, and leaders who were willing to use them. We hated each other based on the color of our skin, the gods we worshipped, the borders we had drawn on maps. We were everything you feared and more. Maria paused, looking up at the thousands of faces watching her. But you made a choice that I believe was a mistake. You decided to lock us away and wait for us to destroy ourselves. You gave us no guidance, no warning, no explanation. You simply put us in a cage and walked away. Her voice grew stronger, filled with an emotion that transcended the translator technology. And in that cage, alone in the darkness, we did something remarkable. We saved ourselves. Not because you showed us how, not because we had any reason to believe anyone was watching, but because somewhere deep inside us, there was a spark of something better, something worth fighting for. Maria walked slowly around the platform, addressing different sections of the chamber in turn. We invented democracy, then corrupted it, then reinvented it again. We developed medicine that could cure diseases and weapons that could cause them. We built cities and burned them down and built them again. Every lesson we learned the hard way, through blood and suffering and loss. She stopped and faced High Arbiter Vexilin directly. You wanted us to destroy ourselves. You expected it. But we refused. Not because we are perfect, but because we are stubborn. Because even in our darkest moments, there were humans who believed tomorrow could be better than today. And eventually, enough of us believed it that it became true. Vexilon's crystalline form pulsed with complex patterns of light. Pretty words, President Santos. But words cannot change history. Your species killed billions of your own kind. You developed weapons of mass destruction before you developed the wisdom to control them. How can we trust that you will not bring that same violence to the galaxy? Maria nodded slowly. You cannot trust us, not yet. Trust must be earned, and we have not had the opportunity to earn it. But I am not asking for trust. I am asking for a chance. She gestured to Derek and his crew. These people came through your barrier not to conquer or destroy, but to explore. When they were surrounded by your warships, they did not fight. When they were brought before your council to be judged, they answered honestly and with respect. Is that the behavior of the monsters you expected? Ambassador Kira L. rose from her seat, her golden feathers catching the light. I have studied humanity for 3,000 years. I have seen their worst and their best, and I believe President Santos speaks the truth. Humanity has changed in ways that defy all our models and predictions. They should not have been capable of this transformation, yet they achieved it nonetheless. Another voice spoke up, this one belonging to a massive being that looked like a living mountain of gray stone. The Morvacs have seen many species in our long history. Some were violent, some were peaceful, but all were predictable. Humans are not predictable. This makes them dangerous, but it also makes them valuable. Perhaps we have been too quick to judge. More representatives began to speak, some in favor of giving humanity a chance, others still calling for their destruction or continued isolation. But Derek noticed something different from the previous day's debate. The tide was shifting. Maria's words were having an effect. The debate continued for hours. Maria answered questions with patience and honesty, never trying to hide humanity's flaws or minimize their past mistakes. She spoke of the wars they had fought and the lessons they had learned. She spoke of the environmental destruction they had caused and the decades of work it had taken to heal their planet. She spoke of the unified government they had built and the principles of peace and cooperation that guided it. And slowly, one by one, representatives who had been calling for humanity's destruction began to change their minds. When the vote finally came, the chamber fell silent. High Arbiter Vexolan stood at his place above the assembly, light pulsing rapidly within his crystalline form. The council will now vote on the question of humanity's status. The options are full destruction of the human homeworld, continued isolation with reinforced barriers, or admission as a probationary member species with ongoing monitoring and review. The voting took only minutes. When it was done, Vexolan announced the results, now by a vote of 312 to 88. With 47 abstentions, the Galactic Council has decided to admit humanity as a probationary member species. The isolation zone is hereby dissolved. Earth and its people are welcome in the galactic community. The chamber erupted. Some representatives cheered, others shouted in anger, still others sat in stunned silence. But on the central platform, the humans simply looked at each other with tears in their eyes. They had done it. After 3,000 years, humanity was free. Maria walked to Admiral Derek and took his hand. "We could not have done this without you," she said quietly, her voice barely audible over the chaos in the chamber. "You opened the door. We just walked through it." Derek shook his head. "This is only the beginning. We have a lot of work ahead of us." "We always do," Maria replied with a small smile. "That is what it means to be human." Ambassador Curiel joined them on the platform, her large eyes bright with emotion. "The council will be watching you closely. Some will look for any excuse to reinstate the isolation. You will need to prove yourselves every day." "We understand," Maria said. "And we will. Not because we are being watched, but because it is the right thing to do." Kira L. nodded, a gesture she had learned from studying human culture. "Then welcome to the galaxy, President Santos. I suspect you will make it a very interesting place." In the weeks and months that followed, human ships began to spread across the stars. They established diplomatic relations with dozens of species, opened trade routes, and began the long process of learning about the galaxy they had been excluded from for so long. There were setbacks and conflicts, moments when it seemed like humanity's old nature might reassert itself. But each time, they found a way to choose peace over war, cooperation over conflict, and back on Earth. Billions of people looked up at the night sky and knew that the universe was no longer a mystery beyond their reach. It was their home now, vast and full of wonders, waiting to be explored. Humanity's story was just beginning.